Welcome to the Impact Over Optics podcast, a place where real progress shines beyond appearances and distractions. Here, voices from across industries come together to share wisdom, stories, and strategies that remind us what's possible when purpose leads the way. Because true progress is not measured by how it looks, but by the impact it leaves behind. Let's get started.
All right, we're starting laughing. All right. Welcome to Impact Over Optics, the podcast where we go beyond appearances and focus on what really moves the needle. Authentic leadership, purpose for results, and lasting impact. I'm your host, Dave Dieffenbach, and today we're going to have a little bit of fun. We're going to talk a little about humor and leadership. And humor is not about always laughing. It's just about trying to make space we're in a little more light. And to start with a personal story of humor kind of in leadership. It was early in my career where I was interviewing for a job that I was nervous, first corporate job ever. And I did what I was supposed to do. I wore a white shirt, I wore a tie, probably one of those silly little flexible ties. And I went in and it was an interview for a customer support job, not a life-changing job, but I went in very serious, tie, everything, did my interviews, did panel interviews. And I walked out and I didn't realize when I walked out that everyone in the call center was at the window watching me. But I walked out, and as I was leaving the place, I was pulling my tie off. Just I hated wearing it. I just pulled it right off. By the time I got in the car, I was just tieless. And I was just didn't ever want to have to wear a tie again. And the first day of work, I came in and they all were laughing. And I had earned a nickname of Superman because I was so quickly taking off the tie. And I find that story, it ties me back to that. I stayed at that company for 17 years, but that was my introduction, the Superman interview where it was funny. Right. It wasn't trying to be funny, but they were entertained that day lighter. And I think the first day I came in, it was a little bit lighter place to work. Or I shouldn't say I made it lighter, but my first day there was a lot lighter because I already had that shared experience with them, which was just funny.
So I don't want to hijack your question, but can I ask you a follow-up on that? Do you feel like being Superman led to an easier way to make connections in your new space?
Yeah, I have a lot of fondness for those early days. And I think it was because it wasn't that moment. It was more the environment that already existed where it was a high stress job, not nearly as high stress as some of the emergency management jobs you guys did, but we were constantly getting calls. And whenever you weren't on a call, you were usually prairie dogging, standing up and talking to someone about something. And usually we were joking around a lot. So I think the atmosphere there was already welcoming that. I mean, there's a reason why they all ran to the window to watch, right? It was sort of that culture. So I fit right in. And the humor there was sort of a discharge from all the stress we have, but also, it definitely made me more comfortable, probably helped my early career success too, because I could be myself.
I love that.
Yeah.
And again, I love how that was probably super organic. Like, I don't think you thought about it and you wanted to tear this off. It was natural. It was you. And you gave your potential future coworkers a vision into you, a piece of transparency that let them see who you were. That's an awesome story. I apologize in advance if we refer to you as Superman after this, because
it's time for you to introduce your nickname.
I'm a little embarrassed by this one. And I want to give the disclaimer as we refer to humor. Again, I'm a paramedic by trade, so some of my humor is dark. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But my nickname, this was a funny story. Early on in my career, I ended up getting injured on a call. I was transported to the hospital and had a back injury and it required pain management. I was in an immense amount of pain and the doctor came in, we're going to get you pain management. Perfect. They're going to give you an injection. I understand all of this, no problem at all. And as we were going through the process, my nurse came in and it was a nurse that I knew. She's a nurse educator, phenomenal person. Chris is her name. And she said, "Jon, could you do me a favor? I have a student nurse here who's looking to get experience on patient assessment. Do you mind giving her an opportunity?" I'm like, "Chris, I am dying. I'm hurting so bad. I just want the meds." She's like, "I'll get you your meds. Deal with her." So this wonderful young nursing student came in and she was great and she asked all the questions. And I was like, "Listen, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you. Can you please just go get the medication? Because I'm really hurting." And she's like, "Okay." She comes back in and this is an injection that needs to go in muscle. So in a human body, like the place that you have the most muscle is the muscles you sit on, if you know what I mean. So she's like, "I'm going to help you roll over." And I'm like, "Okay." So she rolls me over and she's like, "Are you ready?" And I'm like, "Please just give me the shot." Not exactly the words I should have used because the next thing I knew, I feel in my rear end. Followed up immediately with, oops. And if you're in healthcare, you know the word oops never comes out of your mouth. So instantly I'm in a panic because they're on my south side and I'm like wondering what's going on. And she's like, I'll be right back. And I'm like, oh my word. And I'm panicking at this point. Like, I don't even know what to do. Nurse comes back in and I'm like, Chris, what is going on? She's like, Jon, don't worry. It's going to be okay. And I'm like, that's not helpful because she said oops. And she's like, she broke it off. And I'm like, I'm sorry, she what? She broke it off in my rear end. And she's like, yeah, I'm going to take care of it. And I'm like, oh my goodness. I'm super self-conscious at this point. They give me the medication. Everything's fine. We go a couple weeks. I get back to work. I'm walking down the hallway in the hospital that I'm working for. And this nurse preceptor with a bunch of nursing students walk by. And they're looking, and they're pointing and giggling. Nobody likes to be pointed at and giggled at. Happens again a couple weeks later, and again a couple weeks later. And I'm like, what is going on here? So I finally say to Chris, what is all the pointing and laughter? She's like, well, they kind of have a name for you. Name for me? She's like, yeah. They refer to you as the paramedic with the buns of steel. And I was like, my God, you've got to be kidding me. So for that entire class, that continued on. And every time in the hallway, there would be the laughter, the chuckles, and I was known as the paramedic with the buns of steel. And the reality is, it made me super self-conscious in the beginning, but what a great way to use humor to sort of lighten up a very difficult job. These nursing students they are under such immense pressure. They have so much they need to learn in a very short period of time. And here one sort of, and it was a safe interaction again, as another provider. It wasn't something that they would typically do, but it was a safe interaction for them to have that outlet.
That's great. So I'm not going to hold you to a nickname, Jim.
Well, I actually do have a nickname. Jon remembers the story because he was part of it. At one point, Jon and I were serving in public safety on a tactical response team, and I was a medic there. We were at a military base where we were training with this team for a long day. And some of the team was staying over. Some of us were heading back at the end of the rotation. So I was on the part heading back, and we had been in the field for a long time during the day. I didn't have overnight quarters where we were staying. So I said to one of the leaders, do you mind? I really just need to use your bathroom before we head back because we had about an hour and a half drive. So I used the bathroom. I thought everything was fine. And I left. And the next time I got together with this team, they razzed the crap out of me, literally, because I somehow, unbeknownst to me, managed to clog this senior leader's toilet before I left. And it's like 12 o'clock at night. And these guys were they wanted to go to bed. And all of a sudden they had a problem they needed to deal with. I had no idea. So I picked up a nickname, which I won't actually use here on the podcast. Yeah. But what it was, Jon talked about it being a high stress environment. We were always in a high stress environment. Every time we were together with this team, we were training seriously. Whenever we would be deployed, we were deployed in an urgent, life-threatening situation. Humor was the tool that they used. And, you picked up a call sign along the way. And now I had a call sign for the rest of my time on the team. And they just razzed the living crap out of me every time. I was like, but it was funny. And it became funny. And we as a team had already bonded together, but that just made it deeper a little bit because now as somebody who was a medic on the team and part of their care provider team, I was also accepted by them. That humor, my reaction to the humor and the way we played with it afterwards just made us a closer group over time.
So explore a little bit about where trust comes into the humor equation.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I think that's a huge piece because again, first off, if you're going to laugh at yourself, you need to have a high level of self-awareness. And Jim was a great spirit. Like he was so good about it. But again, we need to trust those people, I think, to really be able to laugh comfortably because otherwise you feel like it's a personal attack or you feel as though the humor is at your expense. It's your blood and tears that they're laughing at. And that is not, at least in public safety, it's ever what it has been about. It's been about lightening the mood. So we don't feel some of those stresses. So trust is a huge piece of that. If you don't have that in place and, either one of our stories without the trust, and you were building trust at that point, but without the trust, it could have felt like a personal attack. And none of these were ever meant to be that.
That's great.
So I think that's where trust plays into that is you have to focus on relationship building. You have to focus on building trust and then leveraging humor to lighten the mood is a very important tool, I think.
But it's reciprocal as well, right? They had to, I don't know that they quite trusted. They were just doing it anyway. But I had to trust that what was coming from them was truly, we love you. You did something funny and we're going to pick on you about it now. And when I would laugh back with them, that was like, oh, and he's perfectly capable of accepting that. It bonded me deeper into that team over time. And then when I would come up with them the next time, I think that made me a better provider for that team because I was a friend. I was somebody they could joke with. And then they could share with me something they probably might have been a little more uncomfortable with sharing otherwise. Some physical ailment, some physical problem. They could come to me as a part of the team and say, I need you to help me understand this. And I could say, yeah, man, come on, let's fix this. It will be okay.
You're being a little modest. And I'm just going to say you are one of the few providers on that team that after your time on the team, you remained as close as you did. You were such a trusted part of that team that long after your time, you still stay connected. Those are guys that still laugh with you, that still reach out to you when they need you. It highlighted the fact that you built that trust and you laughed with everybody.
Through the humor.
But beyond the immediacy of the job, that trust continued, the friendships continued, and humor, ironically, was the tool that sort of enabled that. So you made a big difference there.
Right.
It's funny.
Definitely an enabler. And it's a nice arc tie back to our last 2 months, right? We talked about authentic connections, multiplexity, the fact that humor is a tool. And you think about these stories we're all telling too, that those are all stories that didn't actually happen in the workplace. They happened near the workplace, but they made work better.
Yes.
Right. Because in my National Guard experience, right, I was playing military and our exercises were very serious.
I'm just going to stop you. You were not playing military.
We were, though.
You served, and I appreciate that, and we're thankful for you.
In our military exercise, we were very serious. But the moment the index happened, we were no longer serious. Right? We had the time of my life. Most of the stories I relate with my National Guard brothers are ridiculous, fun, non-relatable stories, kind of like your humor, Jim. But it made us better airmen together, right? And it's amazing what humor can do. And we were talking before that we went live too about some of those, this lightning of the environment. If you smile at somebody, you can bring the light back and pass it on. These are such important tools. Humor as a tool to help with authenticity. I do want to ask a question because we just kind of jumped right in, which I love. Early in our careers, we sort of absorb messages about where humor fits in. What was your experience earlier in your career of when humor was appropriate, or was it always appropriate in the workplace?
So I had an experience where we've talked through this arc about the shirt and tie and jacket environment. In one of 2 or 3 jobs in, I was paired up with a guy who was a couple actually of ex-military guys. One of them was a major still serving in the reserves. The other had been a Marine who was an enlisted guy. And the enlisted guy just was the first time I ever saw anybody not take work seriously. That's a defining moment, I think, in everybody's career. The first time you're like, he just makes jokes and laughs all the time about anything we're doing. We're working hard. We're working not hard. We're having lunch, whatever it is. He just was always funny. And I think, in learning about his experience, I think it was because he had seen so much stuff that was so much harder than what we were doing. He was like, I'm not taking any of this seriously. I'm going to pick on things and bust on things. And that really opened up for me because all of a sudden I was like, oh, it's okay. And I was still very nervous. And it took a long time for me to be able to play along with that and then take that in with others. But I think somewhere, and I hope everybody's work experience, you meet somebody who just is relaxed enough to use humor as a tool. And once you see that used in a leadership environment or in a peer environment, you realize the strength and the power of the thing that's there.
And I think for me, again, in public safety, the one thing I think about is my time working as a flight medic with a medevac crew. We had incredible pilots, guys that had served 20 years in the military, 2 Marine lieutenant colonels, 2 Army captains that were flying for us. These guys have done a lot of things. They used humor at the perfect moments. It was never in front of a patient. It was never in front of a family. It was never when we needed to focus because the task at hand was important. It was at the perfect moment when it was time to decompress and time to lower the temperature, time to relax a little bit. And they would come up with, sometimes it would be a funny phrase, sometimes it would be inappropriate. But again, it was a tool that was used to sort of return us to the baseline. We had elevated so high in stress that we used and they used that tool to help bring things back down, which I think was super important.
That's great. That's great. Earlier in my career, I think I had expected humor to be for breaks, for one-on-ones, for side time. And there's some truth to that, right? When you're on a call with somebody, you don't necessarily make a joke at the expense of a client or a customer. But in that same environment, there was maybe more play than humor. But the senior leaders at this company, the CEO and others, they would regularly play a game called shoe golf. They would just walk outside on a nice day. They'd each take their shoe off and they'd say, that tree. And they'd fling their shoe towards that tree. They would be walking and talking about business, but they would see who could get the shoe closest by flinging it. You look at that type of leadership model and you say, wow, I'd want to
That's
work there,
fantastic.
right? That's
Yeah.
great. Because at some point they were actually modeling a play, very serious work environment. So I learned quickly, it wasn't just about one-on-ones. You could actually do it during the workday. You could actually blend the two quite well. Great decision-making, great thoughts happen when we talked about this before, when you're outside in nature doing things, when you're actually not sitting, not trying to solve a problem. You can actually bring those problems together. And that wasn't intentionally humorous, but it was pretty funny to watch.
And I think as young people getting into your careers, knowing where and how to leverage that isn't always easy, right? Like we hear it and you're like, well, that was funny. Should I laugh? I'm going to laugh.
Yeah.
But we struggle with where do we put it in? And again, I think back to some of the most effective leaders that I've worked with and team members, they were able to find a way to interject humor at the perfect moment, not when it was inappropriate, not when it was uncalled for, but when it was private, where we needed it. And sometimes it was a phrase, sometimes it was a story, sometimes it may be a call sign, but it was done correctly. And I think that's the other piece of humor that's really important to recognize is that, again, whether you're dealing with product development or public safety or any career, there are times that humor is important. And there are also times to know when it's not. So I think that as a young medic trying to find my place was discerning that, is this the right time? And I made some mistakes. I used humor when I probably shouldn't have because I thought for me it was cathartic to allow me to heal, but it wasn't fair to the people that were around me. Again, being aware and not tone deaf to the situation, I think is another important piece of humor.
So I saw that often when I was early on. I was doing customer service level jobs, and you would be dealing with an angry or frustrated client. And one of the things, once I had seen humor used in the workplace, was trying to use humor as a diffuser over time. Sometimes you pick the wrong client and the wrong time to use humor, and sometimes you did. But the successes almost always outweighed the failures, and the successes always had more benefit to them over time. I was like, okay, the one time I failed, it was really bad, but the 2 or 3 times when it actually worked, it made that whole interaction so much better. So
At the same time, I can feel the cold sweat of a joke that didn't land. When you say
Yeah.
that. I can feel that cold sweat of, oh no, I've got to make this better.
Yeah.
I've got to backtrack
Yeah.
and make
Oh,
sure they
yeah.
understand that joke was coming from a place of intent.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing about humor that's interesting in the workplace too, and we talked about this a bit, and John, I'd like you to expand on it, which is around conflict and how humor can help deal with complex or challenging situations. What's your experience with that?
So again, as a medic, I don't get invited in the ambulance to come to somebody's graduation party or to celebrating the birth of a child. We get called on people's worst day when their life is changing literally in an instant. We deal with a lot of very difficult situations, and medics and firemen and police officers, soldiers, because of that trauma that we see, because of that conflict that is a ever-present part of our lives, we end up almost defaulting to humor, and not just humor, but a dark humor.
Yeah.
I am not, after 30 years of being a medic, I'm not 100% sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but there were many times that humor, albeit dark, was what allowed us to do more work. And again, if you come back from a very difficult call, and I won't even go into what creates my nightmares, but when you come back from that, sometimes the only way to get your mind out of that spiral is to laugh. Sometimes it's not at the appropriate things. Sometimes we are a little dark in the way that we approach it. But humor can provide a little bit of that release. And it gives you, maybe it's only 2 or 3 seconds of that good endorphin, that feeling that you needed to elevate yourself, to get out of where you were. I would never say that dark humor is acceptable when you look at it in the context of someone's suffering or those things, but sometimes it's just the way that we deal with it. So it was a double-edged sword, but conflict sometimes breeds that need to address or allow dark humor approach.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's just another way to use the tool.
Right. And it doesn't even have to be dark humor and conflict. Sometimes when you're just in that stressful situation, like Dave has often talked about being in an agile scrum type of environment, and you're coming towards release and everybody's in the room and everybody's tight and everybody's tense. Just that funny joke that breaks the tension in the middle of that meeting will lighten everybody up. And the moment they're lightened up, their shoulders drop down a little bit, their breathing is a little easier, their ideas flow a little more comfortably, just because you were able to find that time. And sometimes you miss.
Right.
Sometimes you read the room wrong.
That's right.
So it made me actually think about a time today. I end up doing a lot of interviewing, leadership development and whatnot for public safety professionals. And we were interviewing for a fairly high stress position. It was a high level operations position, and we were bringing in a lot of really good candidates. And I truly do believe in the midst of interviewing, one of your most important features is to be able to help the candidates feel comfortable. If you go into an interview with like, I'm going to make them uncomfortable, you don't get the right things out. And we were doing an interview, and I don't even know where it came from. But as I was introducing the interview panel that was going to be introducing this candidate, I could tell that the candidate was nervous, very nervous. You could see it in their face. They were anxious in their body language. And I always run through the same professional stuff. We appreciate you coming in, yada, yada, yada. And I was like, I have one very important question before we get started. Pancakes or waffles? And the candidate's look, puzzling doesn't even describe it.
Right.
But looking at my interview team, that's what really said to me, They were puzzled. But the candidate looks and he's like, pancakes? And I was like, are you asking me or are you telling me? He's like, well, I like pancakes because I don't like the crispy part of the waffles. I was like, that's awesome. But I like the crispy part of the waffles. Everybody laughed. That moment changed the entire tone of the interview, and everybody relaxed a little bit. You could see the candidate take a deep breath and get into the groove. So I think you have that opportunity sometimes to use humor in those moments to really change the feeling, the vibe going on.
I think we have a title for this episode. It's either going to be pancakes or waffles or buns of steel.
Guys are killing me.
No, I like the first one better. What else do we want to talk about with humor?
Humor is trust. Humor is authentic. I have to feel comfortable with that person. I have to feel comfortable in that room. I have to feel like they're going to be comfortable with me along the way. So we've talked a lot about building relationships, building friendships. All of that is building trust to allow humor to be the tool. That is one of your extra tools that's available to you over the way. And sometimes some of these stories are taking us back in the other way, where in my story specifically, we're using humor to deepen a relationship, right? Rather than knowing that the trust there was there in the first place, just like your Superman story. The humor built the trust, or the trust can build the humor, but each way can work.
That's right.
That's powerful.
It is. And one of the stories I was telling earlier too is, a lot of times humor is retrospective. You're like, that was funny, right? But you didn't realize in the moment. I have another story with an agile release where we literally, to have alcohol at the company I was working with, you had to get someone at a high level to approve it. So we actually were approved to have a release party for this release. We had alcohol ready to toast, and someone came in right as we were ready to toast to say, the release is screwed, right? We found a bug. It wasn't funny in the moment, right? But so we basically, capped everything up. So instead we released, actually what I improvised, and I said, here's to the provisional release. But those types of moments are funny in retrospect. But I tell the story too about the senior leaders at a company I was at who were just contentious. They argued all the time. We'd hear them arguing behind a conference room. And one time they were quiet for a while, and then we heard laughter. And of course that makes you a little nervous when they went from anger to laughter. But when they left, we walk in the room and the whiteboard is just full of words related to animal-related phrases. Things like, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Or, I don't have a dog in this fight. Just full of all these things. And we sat there and sort of recreated what had happened, which is something happened at one point where one person said a word, someone else said another phrase. Someone started realizing how many words in the American lexicon are animal-related themes. And they just completely stopped working and started making just, the board is full. It's hilarious, right? They were enjoying themselves for a moment. And I think that was a really useful way for them to use humor, to a different kind of conflict than the one you were talking about, John. But for them, they were in conflict. Next thing you know, they were doing a really silly exercise.
So I want to pull on something you said there that I think is really important. It took one person to start that.
Right.
And then it became contagious. Humor in its essence is contagious.
Yeah.
Laughter is contagious. When you hear somebody laughing, you perk up and you're like, what are they laughing about? It is one of those things that's able to be shared pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I think, again, when we look at tools, not just in leadership, but in relationships and in life, when the things that we do, the actions that we take create contagious energy.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
It's powerful. One of the things I remember, Dave, you telling me is you love to smile at somebody when you're walking down the street. Just a big smile with a hello. When you said that to me the first time, I didn't really understand it until I tried experimenting with it. And the powerful thing you said afterwards is do it and then don't think about where it went. Don't think about, will this person take it and embrace it? Will they share a smile with somebody else? Will they be doing something differently in their day? You just said, give it to them and let it go.
Mhm.
I love that again about humor because I think it's one of those things that you can share and let it go. Because I know, again, when I think about the stressful moments of my job and whatnot throughout my career, it was the moments that I had the opportunity to chuckle a little bit, laugh, that lightened me and almost healed me to allow me to do more things, to see more patients, to run more calls, to deal with more tragedy. Humor is an important piece of how we connect, I think, with more.
Yeah, I want to come to that because we often think about humor as something that's funny, right? But Dave, you said something really interesting. At the time, you said something funny in a moment when it was very painful, right? In some ways, humor is a defense mechanism. Get to try and make light of something that is uncomfortable. We use humor as a tool to relieve the stress, like you were talking about, Jon. Some way to say, I know this hurts right now. Okay, we're going to deal with it and we're going to try and just lighten up and loosen and let go of that pain so that we can go on and do the next thing and be better along the way.
Great. I fully did not expect this to become a stand-up routine, this episode, but I like where it's gone. We're getting to the point, I think we have a natural conclusion where we ask ourselves the question, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this discussion?
It's okay to be uncomfortable with something and laugh about it and use that laughter to diffuse the energy and diffuse the situation.
Holy crap, dude. That is literally like sage information right there, right? Like allow that, be comfortable, be able to laugh at yourself, be able to laugh at the situation. If I were to think about the takeaway, I think for me, it is understand that humor is a tool that has applications in different areas. There are times that we laugh about something. There are times sometimes that we use dark humor. There are times we cry together. At the end of the day, humor is a tool in our toolbox that every single one of us should be able to use at any time as the situation dictates.
Right. Yeah. I think we didn't say this during the session, but I was thinking about it is when we use humor, we're now performing. It's not performative. We're using humor at work as a tool to collaborate, a tool to work together. So we're not doing stand-up. We're just relating together. And I think people should remember in their workplace, humor is less of a performative gesture and more of a tool to work better together.
I love
That's
that.
great.
Guys, this has been a great conversation, and I really appreciate taking this on. I was nervous coming into this because sometimes my humor is not appropriate, but I really enjoyed this. So I'm Jon Detweiler, joined by Superman and call sign that I'm not allowed to use. Again, thank you for joining us. Remember, authentic change always outlasts appearance. Until next time, lead with purpose and leave a real mark.
Thanks again for joining us on the Impact Over Optics podcast. We hope today's insights sparked fresh ideas and reminded you of the power of purpose-driven work. Please share this episode with others who believe in real change, and join us again as we continue to look beyond appearances and focus on the impact that truly lasts.